Welcome to our first video here, actually looking at determining the number of significant figures in a problem. So before we actually start and look at some example problems, what I want to do is actually look at four kind of guidelines that will help you with this process. So we'll take a look at these, and I've got them up on our screen. We can see them right now. The first one is determine if the number that you're looking at has a decimal or not. This is going to be your first step, pretty easy to look at. Just see if we have that decimal located in that number or not. Our second step is going to be actually using what we call the Atlantic-Pacific rule. You'll kind of see what that is and you're going to look at that, but that's going to help you determine what side you're going to start on the number and what way you're going to move across that number when you're looking at first significant figures. The third step is actually when we're going to be moving across the number as we're looking at this. So after we've determined what side we're going to start on, either the Atlantic or Pacific side, what we're going to do is actually move across the number, and we're going to move until what we hit the non-zero number. And we'll talk about that, and you guys will see examples as we're doing these problems, and we'll reference these guidelines as we're doing some of the examples. And our last step is once we've hit the first non-zero number, we're going to count up that number and everything after that as significant. Again, you guys should look and reference the notes. We've talked a little bit about what significant figures are in class. We've done some labs that correlate to this. These are just some practice problems, and this video here will help you with worksheet number 1, also with some of the problems on the Moodle that we'll be doing. So let's take a look at some examples and actually apply these rules, and we can kind of see where they correlate to our problems. So, number 1, all of these will say determine the number of significant figures, and then with each problem here we'll have an example there, and that's exactly what we're taking a look at. So this is the one we're looking at right here, 23401. So that's the number that we're going to work with in this problem. And they'll be like that for all the problems that we're looking at. So 23401 is the number that we're going to work with. Our job is to determine whether we have, or the number of significant figures we have in this example. So here are the four guidelines that we took a look at. Our first step was to determine if there is a decimal. So 23401. I don't see a decimal, so I'm going to say that my decimal is absent. So that's my first step. Done. Now, based on whether I have a decimal or not, that's going to determine whether I start on the Atlantic or Pacific side of that number. When we're talking about Atlantic or Pacific, we are actually talking about the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean. You can see this kind of map if you're not the geography type here. So we're taking a look at this. We said that our decimal was absent, so we are going to start on this side here where our decimal is absent, which is the Atlantic side. So that's how you're going to actually remember this. Absent starts with an A, Atlantic Ocean starts with an A, so we're going to start on the Atlantic side of this number, which is the right side of this number. So I want to start here on the right side of the number. That's allowing me to figure out where I'm going to move across this. Now let's actually do this moving part. Now, big misconception is we're not actually moving in any decimals. All we're doing is we're kind of going across this, and we're looking for our first number that's not zero. Non-zero number. Okay, let's talk about what a non-zero number is. It's not that complicated. Non-zero means it's just not zero. So don't get too confused in the terminology there. So we're looking for any number that's not zero. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start on the right side of this number right here. I'm going to move across this from the right, from the Atlantic side, to the left. So I'm moving from the Atlantic side here to the left. I'm going to continue to move across this number until I hit the first non-zero number. Let's look at the first number that I run into. It's 1. Alright, 1 is not 0, so I'm actually going to stop here. I want to stop until once I hit the first non-zero number, which in this example is actually the first number. So let's check that mark off. Good step. Our final step is actually counting the number of sig figs. So let's take a look at this. I've hit this number here, and my rules were that the first non-zero number that I hit and every number after that is significant. So let's take a look. The first number that I hit was 1. This 1 and every single number after this 1, so the 1 and every single number after this are all going to be considered to be significant. So this one's significant. That's 2 numbers that are significant. That's 3. Here's a 4th number that's significant, and I have one more number to the left of that. I have 5 numbers that are significant. So my answer for this problem would be that I have 5 sig figs, and that just means significant figures. And I've got my final step checked there. I've counted up my number of significant figures. Let's go on. Let's take a look at another example, and hopefully these guidelines will become a little bit more clear as we look at some of these problems. Problem number 2. So let's take a look at the number that we're given. We have to determine how many sig figs we have in 3.100. Let's use those 4 guidelines to figure out how many sig figs we have. Step number 1 is determining whether we have a decimal absent or present. I look at my number. There it is. I see that I actually have a decimal that is present. So now I want to use that decimal to determine what side of the number I'm going to start on using my Atlantic or Pacific rule. My decimal is present, so I want to start on the Pacific Ocean side because present starts with P, Pacific starts with P, so I want to start on the left side, the Pacific side. So I need to start on the Pacific side of that number, which is the left side of that number over here. So I'm going to take my little arrow here, I'm going to move across this number from the left now until I hit the first non-zero number. So here I go, I'm moving from the left and I'm just kind of going across this. Again, I'm not moving any decimals, I'm just kind of working my way across this, going until I hit the first number that's non-zero. The first number that I hit is 3. Remember, a non-zero number is any number that's not 3, or excuse me, that's not 0. The first number that I hit is 3. That's not 0, so that number is considered to be significant, and every number after that is also considered to be significant. So we've hit our non-zero number, and now we need to count up how many sig figs we have. The first number that I hit, or the non-zero number that I hit, is going to be significant, so that's my 3. This number is significant, and everything after that is significant. So the 1 is significant, and then these 2 zeros actually after this are also considered to be significant. So in this example problem, I have 4 numbers that are considered to be significant. So my answer would be I have 4 sig figs. Let's take a look at another example here. And just cross that off. Example number 3. So let's take a look at what number we're working with. It's 7,900. So we're going to take a look at this example and start with our guidelines here. Step number 1 says determine if there's a decimal. I don't see a decimal in this problem. I do see a comma. Don't get confused with that. Make sure that you're not confusing those for decimals. So I'm going to say that my decimal is absent. If my decimal is absent, I'm going to start on this side of my number. So I said my decimal is absent. I moved on to my Atlantic Pacific rule. My decimal is absent. Absent starts with an A, so I'm starting on the Atlantic side of my number, which is going to be the right side of my number, as we can see from our map. So now I'm actually just going to look across this number, and now I'm actually on this next step here. I'm going to move across this until I hit the first non-zero number. So here I am on the right side, and I'm moving across this till I hit the first non-zero number. The first one I come across is 0. That is a 0, so I can't include it. I got to keep going till I hit something that's not 0. The next one that I come across is also 0. That doesn't count. I got to keep moving till I hit the first non-zero. The next number that I run into is 9. There's my first number that's not 0. So that number and every number after that are going to be considered significant. So we've determined the side, we've moved across to our first non-zero number, which was 9. Now let's count that number and every number after that as significant. So I count my 9 as significant, and I'm going to count my 7 as significant. So I'm counting everything to the left of that first non-zero number as significant. So there we go. I've got 2 numbers that are significant, and that's my answer. I have 2 sig figs. And let's just cross off that last step because we got our answer. Let's move on to another example problem. We got 2 more here to look at, and then we'll do some practice problems on the Moodle site and hopefully have a good understanding of where you're at with this. 4,800,900. So let's take a look at that. First thing I want to do is determine whether the decimal is absent or present. I don't see a decimal in this example, so I'm saying that my decimal is absent. That's my first step. Done. Now I want to determine whether I'm going to start on the Atlantic or the Pacific side. Decimal is absent, so I'm going to start on the Atlantic side, which is the right side of the number, and I'm going to move across it towards the left, starting on the Atlantic side. So now let's do this. Let's work our way across this number from the Atlantic side, the right side, towards the left until we hit the first non-zero number. Starting here, First number that I hit is 0. I got to keep going. I got to get a non-zero. Next number that I hit is 0. I have to keep going. I got to hit a non-zero. The next number that I hit is 9. Okay, so 9 is not 0, so that's my first non-zero digit. So that number and every number after that are going to be considered significant. So this 9 and everything after that are considered to be significant measured values. So I'm going to count up how many numbers I have there, and then we're going to determine how many sig figs we have. So let's go ahead and do that. My 9 is significant. The 0 after that is significant. The next 0 to the left of that is significant. The 8 is significant, and the 4 is significant. If you're following me counting up on top, that's 5 sig figs. That's what I want to have for my answer. So I have 5 sig figs in this example. Let's continue on to our last example here, and then we'll see where we're at. We'll try some of the quizzes out, and we'll see if you guys have mastered counting sig figs. So here's my number, 0.00740. Definitely see a decimal there. Let me just circle that so you guys are on the same page with me. Decimal is present. Step 1, done. Decimal's present. That means I'm going to start on the left side, which is the Pacific side of this number. Step 2, done, starting on the Pacific side. Now I'm just going to kind of go across this number from the Pacific side, which is the left side, towards the right side until I hit the first number that's not 0. So here I go. Starting on the right side, I can start out with a 0. I must continue until I hit the first number that's not 0. The next number that I hit is 0. I got to keep going till I hit a non-zero number. Third number that I hit is 0. Got to keep going till I get that non-zero. Next one that I hit is a 7. That one is a non-zero number. So 7 is not 0. So that's going to be the first number that I actually start with. That 7 and every number after that 7 are considered to be significant. So 7, 4, and 0 are all considered to be significant. Let's count these up to determine how many sig figs we have in this example. The 7, the 4 to the right of it, and the 3 to the right of that are all significant. That gives me a value of 3. So in this example, I have 3 sig figs. That should sum up the example problems that we have here for determining the number of sig figs. I want you guys to try some of the practice problems that we have located on the Moodle. As always, if you have any questions, you can feel free to email me. You can also check the frequently asked questions wiki on our Moodle site. And you guys can also post any questions to our discussion groups or our problem board as a class and see if anybody in the class can actually help you out as you're doing these problems right in real time. Always good to get that feedback. If you have questions still after that, or if you weren't able to satisfy any of those things, make sure that you write down those questions for me so that we can discuss them tomorrow in class. We'll be tackling a worksheet tomorrow in class along with this, and you guys will also have a quiz coming up on this for Unit 1. Hopefully you guys have a good understanding of sig figs, counting them up, and we'll continue to do this. If you mastered this, I'll advise you to actually go on to the next video in which you're actually going to be rounding sig figs. That's all for now.